Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, MP. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Mr. Jehu Wiltshire. Director of the Department of Emergency Management, Ms. Kerri Hinds. President of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, Ms. Marilyn Rice-Bowen. Barbados Project Lead, Risk Communication for Early Action of BBC Media Action, Ms. Kerri Cox. Moderator for today's discussion, Director of News and Current Affairs at Starcom Network, Mr. Stetson Babb. Panelists, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a warm good morning to you. I am Julia Rollins Bentham, Program Officer at the Department of Emergency Management, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for today's event. This event takes the form of a seniors roundtable discussion and expo under the theme, Protecting Our Seniors During Disaster. I will now welcome Director of the Department of Emergency Management, Ms. Kerri Hinds, to deliver her opening remarks.
Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Mr. Jehu Wiltshire. President of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, Mrs. Marilyn Rice-Bowen. Ms. Kerri Cox from the BBC Media Action. Valued partners from the various government agencies, private sector, and civil society groups. Invited guests, MC for today's proceedings, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the media, good morning and welcome. It is only fitting that as Director of the Department of Emergency Management, I bring you brief remarks on this occasion, October 1st, which is celebrated globally as International Day of Elder Persons. It is also on this occasion that the Department of Emergency Management and the Barbados Association of Retired Professionals thought it important for us to discuss issues as it relates to disaster risk management, targeted at you, our seniors. We know that emergency and disaster events that emanate from multiple hazards are one group of threats that are faced by the Barbadian society. And as an example, on this October the 1st, in which is considered the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season, we live in wait of possible hurricane impacts, similar perhaps to the one that visited our shores in July of this year. We are acutely aware that these emergency and disaster events impact our seniors, their lifestyles, and can exacerbate economic and social inequalities. It is a known fact that Barbados has an aging population, and because of our living standards, our population tends to live longer. Rather than be overwhelmed by these many realities, we must choose to be proactive and address the impacts of these emergency and disaster events. The Department of Emergency Management, as part of its mandate and work program, has actively risen to the challenge and acted. Likewise, other government agencies, including the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Barbados Fire Service, to name a few, have done so as well by incorporating senior-centric programming and activities in their work agendas. UNDRR that is the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office, has published a public service announcement in commemoration of this day. And according to the American Red Cross Society, 50% of people who died in Hurricane Katrina were over the age of 75. Additionally, the Lancet Countdown report in the last 2 decades. And I'm sure our partners from BBC Media Action will also reveal to you the results of their study as it relates to the elderly. Today represents another opportunity to leverage and amplify the conversation surrounding the resilience of seniors in disasters, acknowledging the need for collective action in assisting seniors to get ready and stay ready to ride out the storm, to keep cool and calm during these bursts of heat waves, and to cope with pandemics and weather any adversity that may come your way. Seniors, we at the DEM see you as an experienced and wise group who can contribute to resilience building. We want to hear your challenges and your solutions. It is important that we devise practical disaster risk management strategies to support you as a valued group. Today and every day, we continue to bring together diverse voices, mobilize partnerships and coalitions, as well as support and promote advocacy campaigns. Our work at the DEM is critical to building a more resilient Barbados, critical to building a safer and resilient space for all seniors with seniors, critical to building and strengthening partnerships along this resilience journey. I express my utmost gratitude to Mrs. Julia Rollins-Benton, Mr. Simon Aline, and the entire DEM Public Awareness and Relations team for spearheading this activity, as these efforts of engagement with the community speaks directly to 2 of our core objectives. 1, educating all citizens about the various elements of disaster risk management, and 2, creating appropriate mechanisms to promote and advance disaster risk management strategies at all levels of society. To our partners in this endeavor, the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, for readily accepting the opportunity to mobilize and raise awareness amongst a valued base in our society. To the Minister and Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, I take this opportunity to express my sincerest gratitude to you for supporting and joining forces to amplify issues of disaster resilience and safety that are important to our seniors. Our hope at the Department of Emergency Management is that this conversation is one of many, but more importantly, that it leads to the collective, sustainable action in order to make this place a more resilient Barbados. I thank you.
Thank you, Director Hinds, for those inspiring words. We will now hear remarks delivered by President of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, Ms. Marilyn Rice-Bowen.
Good morning, all. Minister of People Empowerment, Honorable Kirk Humphrey. PS in the Ministry, Mr. J. Hugh Wiltshire. Distinguished members at the head table, distinguished members in the audience, partners all, Today outside is warm, in here it's cool, and we are all prepared to exchange information so that at the end of this session, we as seniors will be better prepared for, there's an ad when the high wind comes, but the importance of preparedness is that one has to have a plan in place as we speak before the high winds come. But I'll address that as on the panel. BARP is pleased, and we were extremely happy to be asked to be invited to partner with the DEM, because we recognize that the only way we can strengthen our voice and reach our members is through partnerships, because we cannot do it all alone. So Director Hinds, we want to thank you for your invitation, and we hope that today is just the beginning and that we could cement a relationship between the DEM and BARP, because we are all in this together. I would be extremely brief, but I want to acknowledge that today is our day. You have International Women's Day, you have International Men's Day, you have Valentine's Day, today is International Day for older persons. And I can speak as an older person. So when I speak with you, I am speaking as an older person. Don't ever call me elderly. This year's theme, Aging with Dignity, the importance of strengthening care and support systems for persons worldwide, incorporates our mandate, which is to ensure that older persons can lead lives of independence and dignity. And it's a key element of that is making sure that they get the care and support that they need. As we age, our needs may become more complex, and challenges to our health, finances, family dynamics could be overwhelming. And we could also add in there climate change, because climate change is playing a very serious role. There's a paper written by the persons that are in a wheelchair. But wherever you are, I want to I'll reinforce it during the panel discussion, but if nothing else, I want you to work out your family plan, your family's evacuation plan. You plan for Christmas and you know where you're going to eat, you know who's bringing what. This is more important. A disaster could strike at any time, and you need to know where you're going, and then other persons need to know where you are going as well. So today is going to be a learning process for all of us, but as we leave, let's make sure that we leave with information, and most importantly, we must act. Whatever we learn today, we must act upon it. I wish you a very good day today as we celebrate International Day of Older Persons. And again, I thank the DEM for making this a double celebration, because we are focusing on disaster preparedness for seniors. A pleasant day to all.
Thank you, Mrs. Rice-Bowen. Now, as Mrs. Rice-Bowen said, this is your day. So I'm inviting all the seniors present to stand up and be saluted. Thank you very much. There's going to be a slight change in our program. I now want to invite Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, to deliver his remarks at this time.
A special good morning to everyone. My permanent secretary, Mr. Wilcher, who's here, and the staff of the ministry, the director of the National Assistance Board, who's also here, Miss Colleen Walcott. I got it wrong this morning at a church service. I called her Mrs. Wilcher. I married her to the PS. Marilyn Rice-Bowen, of course, and the person who invited me to sit here at this chair, Your doctor now, Kerri? Dr. Kerri Hinds? Kerri Hinds, soon be doctor, I think. And a special good morning to all. Thank you to those in the media, to DEM, BBC, the persons who've set up along these sides. I see the fire service and other persons. I want to thank all of you for being here. It is my pleasure to be here. I actually had a very busy day, and the PS actually sent me a message telling me that he was going to apologize on my behalf for my absence. He was out of place because I had no intention of being absent. So whatever else we had today, I had to take second table to this particular meeting because I really wanted the opportunity to share with you all and hopefully to learn from you all. So I thank Kerri really for this opportunity to bring together these two ideas. The idea of disasters and the crossroads, the implications for aging. In 2004, I think it was, on September 7th, which incidentally happened to be my birthday. Happens to be my birthday every year. But I think Hurricane Ivan was visiting the Caribbean at that time. And 2 weeks later, after Ivan had passed Grenada, I had the opportunity to visit Grenada, to do work, to help build houses, put back on roofs, and so on. The place was flat. For those Barbadians who have not yet seen a hurricane, who sometimes say things on social media like, I was hoping it had passed, they obviously have no idea what they're dealing with in the real event of a disaster. 2 weeks after Ivan had passed Grenada, it had looked as if Ivan had passed a minute before. All the houses, as far as I could see, were flat, the trees were down, the grass was brown, everything. And what struck me then was the number of older persons that I saw walking around almost aimlessly because they had not figured out what to do post-disaster. And this was not a random thing that happened to me. Marilyn knows, everybody knows that I wrote my dissertation, my master's dissertation on aging. I had written it 3 years prior. So the issues concerning the elderly had always concerned me, always affected me. I've been very invested in this topic. That is why PS could not get me to miss this for the world. But I saw so many older persons walking around, many of them aimlessly. And then when it came to time for persons to get help, older persons were the ones coming forward for the help. It was as if they had almost been left on their own, to fend for themselves, to be the voices. They were the ones coming for the tarpaulin, for the roof. They were the ones coming for the food, and so on. So it struck me then that if disasters are to be properly addressed, that any meaningful conversation around disasters, whether it be ex ante, before, or ex post, after, must involve older persons. And that we cannot have these conversations with older persons afterward as if they're unthinking recipients of people's welfare. And that rather what we need to have is a conversation with older persons because they are the real resource in relation to how we will survive these disasters and how we will recover after these disasters. To say that we have not done a good job of that would be to say it lightly. I do not think as a country, as a region, nor as a world that we have grappled with or properly addressed the issues concerning older persons. And if you think about the issues now, we have a policy that has outlined 8 pillars. I won't go through the pillars, but there are 8 pillars. It speaks to economic issues, it speaks to financial issues, healthcare, and the last one speaks to disasters. And in it, we've outlined very clearly what our objectives must be to be able to address these issues before and after. And that is why this conversation is so important, and I do hope that you take the opportunity to engage with the panel and to ask certain questions and so on. But a big part of that panel, that conversation we had on policy was in relation to healthcare. Not only healthcare in terms of what the government is providing at QEH, and we all know, if we're being honest, we need to do better. We know we need to do better at the polyclinics as well. We know we need to do better in private medical facilities. What we are offering is not enough. And I say so also because a few months ago now, my mother called me. She visited the QEH. And she was going, my mother now is 77 now. And she was experiencing this agonizing pain in her stomach, agonizing. And, if I'd gone with her, she would have get through fairly quickly, right? But I wasn't able to go with her on the day. My mother is that kind of person. She's very stubborn and also very independent. So she determined she was going to go by herself. It's things that she's been doing a lot now that makes me very, very nervous. But nonetheless, she determined she was going to go. And when she got there, she was standing outside, and she tells me that she asked the security guard for a chair because she was in brutal pain, because she actually had ulcers. And she was being treated for these ulcers, but it wasn't working. And the security guard whom she'd asked for the chair told her, you gotta go there and stand out like anybody else. Now, I do not know that you need any special training to know that if somebody is in front of you at the QEH bending over violently in pain, that the least you could do is offer some kind of accommodation. I do not know that we need to pass this legislation, which we intend to pass very soon because we now have the drafted instructions to protect and empower older persons, for people to know that it is not good enough for us to continue to sideline and to ill-treat older persons the way that we do. I also do not think that we need to pass legislation to tell families, and I feel as if there has to be a greater conversation around family. I do not know that we need to pass the legislation to tell families that they have a responsibility to look after older persons. And, I've heard, and we all must be cognizant of the fact that people are carrying trauma. I like to say to people that we are all walking wounded. Everybody's carrying something. I must assure you that I am carrying some things that I need to put down. Many of us were given these things in our childhood, directly or indirectly. All of us carrying a certain degree of hurt. I know that there are many people who can barely bear a conversation with their parents. We talk to some people and they say, when we see them, and the director would tell you, when their parents need help, I don't speak to my mother. Definitely don't speak to my father. He was never around. He did nothing for me. I care nothing for that man. And it is not that it is an unreal emotion. People are dealing with trauma. And if we are going to be able to address the issues affecting other persons, there is a level of trauma that we need to be able to address, and to be able to talk about trauma and to be able to talk about this hurt. But a number of people are unable to engage with older persons, family members, because of trauma. That is a different conversation, and we need to have that conversation. But there are some who had no real trauma, and some we've seen who are completely unavailable during the course of a regular day, who are waiting like vultures for older people to die, to swoop in and to steal their benefits, their assets, and so on. Colleen would tell you, the director of the National Assistance Board would tell you, that the vast majority of cases that we have reported of elder abuse are normally from a family member reporting another family member. A son who refuses to let another son see his mother, a son who refuses to let a daughter see his mother or father, and so on and so forth. We have to be able to address that. Now, there's hardly going to be a government, this or the other, or any other government, that can address those issues unless we have real, serious, deep, and profound, meaningful conversations around family. Now, I've been told very recently that the word family triggers negativity for people. We had a focus group with persons who are in need of government support, and they say they don't like the word family because family for them meant hurt, it meant pain, it meant abandonment, it meant people treated them badly. What you may think is family, and what I may think is family, may be completely different. Because for me, my family is a place where I should go to get consolation and comfort. And for many others, family represented a place where they only received hurt. And that the natural position that I think we took as a government was that we were going to work with family to restore our society, not recognizing that we also had to change the understanding of what family is for many people, because many people do not receive family the same way. And such is the nature of the hurt that I think we are dealing with, and how do we cope with it? Now, I've outlined for us we've outlined in our policy a number of strategic interventions, specifically as it speaks to disasters. I would say to you that when Beryl was passing, my phone was blowing up all over Barbados. One person called me to ask me on the day that Beryl was passing, after all the advisories had been given. He said to me that his mother did not receive Pampers, and he wanted to know if the home health was going to come to the house to change the Pampers of his mother probably a couple minutes before we were impacted by Beryl. Now, it took all of my training and self-control just to say, I don't think so. But what came naturally to me was a completely other position. Like, why would the government have to show up 2 minutes before a disaster to change Pampers for your mother? I say to you that there are people whose only care in this country is when the home health workers from National Assistance Board go, or when the elder care workers from the National Assistance Board go to visit the households. And that those people live in houses with other people sometimes. I had a case known very well to me where the older person said that her granddaughter would wheel her in the chair and put her in a corner and lock the wheelchair and walk away and go and do her business for the whole day. And then she would only see her granddaughter if she came home on the evening, if. And when we had the conversation in front of the granddaughter, the lady who told me all of this, she didn't deny it, she just did not speak. And you know why she didn't speak, right? Petrified, because at the end of the day, she has to rely on the same care from that same person who probably is the only person that she has. And that we have to do better. That is why the coming legislation in those instances that is going to allow us to hold those kind of persons accountable is extremely important. I say to you very clearly that it hurts me to my stomach when I see elder persons being abused in this country because the seniors, the older persons built this country. Barbados is what Barbados is because of you and the people who went before you, and we have to do much better as a country to protect and to empower our older population. I also want to advise that this idea that, and the narrative that we've framed, before I speak very quickly to disasters in closing, that older persons are a burden on the state, and older persons are this problem that we need to solve. Aging is not a problem that we need to solve. Aging is an opportunity that we need to take advantage of. In fact, Barbados is blessed because 1 in 65 Barbadians is over, 1 in every 5 Barbadians is over 65, and 1 in every 4 is over 60. That means we have a great resource just waiting to be tapped. That we haven't tapped in on it properly means that we have work to do in the ministry, Mr. PS. We have to find a way to tap in. And it is also the case that older persons sometimes have more resources, so they offer themselves as an economic powerhouse. And when the moderator asked you to stand just now, those of you who consider yourselves to be older, the truth is the average Barbadian now, in the next 25 years, the average Barbadian will be an older Barbadian. We are heading very quickly where the average Barbadian will be 60 or older. And if we think that we can continue to sideline the average Barbadian, it means that 50% of Barbados will not be in this conversation. You are a lot stronger than you think by virtue alone of your numbers. But you're also a lot stronger than you think by virtue of your experience and by virtue of your knowledge and what it is that you offer. Every time I say something like this, without fail, and the newspaper carry it, Humphrey says there needs to be more opportunities created for older persons. There is always going to be some young person whom I love dearly, but who is going to write underneath the comment, what are you going to do about the young people? These people need to go home and make space for the young people. There is space in Barbados for everybody. But I also know that if, as I saw in Grenada, for the most part, it is still older persons who are the head of the households, whose income when it comes in must pay the bills, whose income must buy the food. And younger people, one of them, we were in my constituency recently, and one young lady told me when she was 16 and I said, you need to train. She said, train? Training? I want money. Training can't buy my weave. Training, isn't that what she said? Training can't buy my hair. But I know if you come into money, it's not to buy hair. You got to pay the bills. You got to buy food. You got to make sure the other people get by. And then older women, because you love your son so much, You allow many of your sons, big grown hard-back men now, to come in and take them pension money and do all kind of things too. It's a fact, because that is how we've been taught as mothers to love on their sons. But I want to give you a little encouragement. Spend some of your money on yourself. Spend some of your money on yourself. Go out occasionally, live life to the fullest. This weekend I went to a funeral in Chalky Mount. It was the first time. Up there is so nice. I'd never been there before, not where this church is. This little church. It's so nice. I mean, just take a little drive, get somebody to drive you and breathe in that air. My daughter, my 4-year-old, wanted to go on a bus. We took her for a bus ride the other day. There's little things that you could do to enjoy your life. It doesn't cost a lot. And if we could do more of these things, it would be nice. As it relates to disasters, in closing, I know we have to do better. We have to make our homes, our shelters more friendly for older persons. And we have to stop speaking of older persons if older persons happens to be one group. There's so much diversity there. We have to be able to speak to the diversity that is alive among older persons, make our facilities more friendly. We created a geospatial map in the government now where we have, and we put it's a vulnerable person list. And we've put on that map persons who are above a certain age, people who live in low-lying areas, people who have disabilities, people who may have chronic ailments. And it gives us an opportunity to be able to move persons quicker. If you want to be on such a list, if you're not already on it, so that we could come to you faster and move you in the event of a disaster, the permanent secretary in the white shirt and red tie is sitting right there. He'd be more than willing to help you. But I do know that we have to do better. God knows how much longer I have in this position, but I close by saying that we will debate that policy in Parliament soon. We will pass the legislation to make sure that older people have a better standard of life in Barbados, that they're empowered in this country. I want to thank the National Assistance Board for the work that they have done over the last few years. It is not an easy job. I know I love y'all, but older persons sometimes don't be easy. As much as I love my mother, she ain't easy. So it is not an easy job, but I want to thank them for the work that they're doing every day. I've also said to them publicly and privately that if I hear y'all smash the crease, hitting anybody's parent, any old person, they know debate, put me in court because you're going home. I ain't dealing with it. And at the end of the day, I am very thankful and very happy for the work that they've been doing. I want to thank Marilyn, Rice-Bowen, and BARP. Marilyn has been an outstanding leader in that space and has taken BARP to new strengths. I really want to thank her. And also the work done at the Seroptimus and so on. I could go on forever because this is something that I care very passionately about. But I don't have all day. And it really has been my privilege and my pleasure to be here. I see the fire service. A lot of what we're dealing with now will be fires, older persons falling. Again, give the fire service a round of applause too, because they've been brilliant. I encourage you all to get your health checked regular, the blood tests, pressure checks, and so on and so forth. Old people, you say that person wasn't sick a day in their life and they're dead just so. Hey, go and get your checks. Because I don't want to be talking about how you weren't sick a day in your life and you died just so. If you know that your pressure is high, deal with it. Deal with your health. Listen, Barbados has a lot of space for y'all. As long as I have breath, I will work to make sure that we allow you to reach your fullest potential, because I strongly believe that the best is yet to come. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Minister, for that very thought-provoking address. Now, there have been some studies conducted on the elderly in Barbados, and I now invite Ms. Kerri Cox of BBC Media Action to do her presentation.
Good morning. Minister of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Mr. Humphrey, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Mr. Jehu Wiltshire, Director, Department of Emergency Management, Ms. Hinds, President, Barbados Association of Retired Person, Ms. Rice-Bowen, and Ms. Walker, National Assistance Board. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the specially invited guests here today. I really thank you for the opportunity to present some of the research findings. I know we've been working in partnership with the Department of Emergency Management over the months, and also working with other organizations that support the elderly and other at-risk populations in Barbados. And it's crucial that we're able to share the research to show how it can impact not just the elderly, but also the media, the organizations that support disaster risk communication, and share how we can all work together to achieve the goal of disseminating effective communication for the elderly. Thank you. So just to give some background information, BBC Media Action is the charity arm of the British Broadcasting Corporation, and we've been working on a project for the past 5 months or so in Barbados that looks at risk communication for early action. So it looks at populations like older persons, fisher folk, the youth, and trying to see how we can improve the communication around disasters. There you go. So it's a project that has been funded by USAID as well as the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And the main goal of the project was to increase persons' ability to communicate effectively about risk for early warning and early action. And we were doing this project in 3 countries, Barbados, of course, but also Somalia and Cambodia. So in terms of in Barbados, the objective of the research was to inform a disaster risk communication strategy that could effectively enable older persons to prepare for and respond to hazards. And we were looking at hurricanes, storms, floods, storm surge, because this was happening right before hurricane season. Just to touch a bit on how we did this, we had in-depth conversations with multiple persons, older persons who were able-bodied, people who live alone with limited financial support, persons with disabilities, people who live in institutions. But then we also met with some of the key experts as well, some in the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the National Assistance Board. We spoke at length with the consultant on the 2023 to 2028 National Policy on Aging, as well as the Companions Program, and met with caregivers of elderly persons, personal caregivers as well as institutional caregivers. And I think one of the main findings, as Minister Humphrey said, was that the elderly, older persons, is not a blanket group in Barbados. Even as we were trying to identify persons that we could interview and have conversations with, you know, we would meet with some people and they would say, but I'm not old, I'm not elderly, you can talk to so-and-so. And we had to say, well, it's in Barbados, you're looking at 65 and older within this particular group. But that shows that there are different profiles of older persons. There's some that we spoke to that had established jobs. They were still working, many of them. Thank you. Sorry, relocating. Right, some had established jobs, some were still working, were looking forward to a sizable pension. Others weren't sure about the pension that they were going to have. They were 70 plus and still working, not living in houses that felt very secure. They weren't sure about what would happen if, you know, a hurricane came, whether their roofs would be secure. There were those that lived with a caregiver, some that lived on their own but with disabilities. So really ran the gamut of persons and groups, even though, you know, you're all blanketed as older persons. And this kind of carries through all of the different findings in the research. So it touches on media and communication channels, the levels of preparedness, and the messaging needs. So in terms of media and communication, one of the major findings was that most people access radio stations and the television station for news, particularly on hurricanes, floods, etc. One informant said, she goes online, but there's a lot of fake information online. So anything to do with weather, she gets it from CBC. And I'm sure that that was the case for many other participants as well. So even they would receive information from television and radio, but then if they wanted more details, that's when they would go on to the internet, to certain websites or social media to get more details. But in terms of the organizations, such as the National Assistance Board, the ministry and whatnot, the way that they would communicate is primarily through telephone calls, word of mouth, government information service. And we found that that's because they're dealing with the more vulnerable of the older persons group. And so they want to be able to engage and have any questions that you have answered when they're dialoguing with you about certain disasters that might be impending. But of course, there are limitations to all of these communications. So in person, the reach is limited because these organizations have limited staff that can actually go out and speak with people. Persons might be hesitant to talk to strangers, especially in this day and age. You don't know who's coming to your house, whether they're official people, they're legitimate, and whether you want to welcome them to be able to have that conversation around disasters. And some persons reside in isolated areas that might be difficult for official persons to get to. In terms of the radio, it's unsuitable for hearing impaired individuals. So yes, lots of people might listen to VOB, which was the one station that a lot of people said they turned to for news. But then you have a growing population of hearing impaired persons that don't have that opportunity. And then as well, the broadcast times. Some persons might not always be listening at the times when different emergency information is broadcast. And then remember what it is that they're hearing when these emergency alerts are broadcast. Television, CBC, even though it's a great resource for many individuals, for those who are visually impaired, they need closed captions, which they don't currently have with CBC. Telephone, again, the reach is limited, and for government and other official organizations that are working in disaster situations, it's really time-consuming to have to go through a full list of people every time there's an impending hazard. One other thing that came out was the quality of the communication. Persons said that they need the messages that are coming from media, coming from the disaster agencies, to include more detailed information. Information like the contacts that support evacuation. If something's happening, I need to leave my home, I don't really know who to call in a particular type of situation. I don't have a phone number that I can quickly access. The expectations of emergency shelters, and I think Minister Humphrey mentioned this as well. Yes, they have a list of shelters in their area, but what can I expect when I get there? Will they have the type of assistance that I need? Will they have any healthcare people on board that can answer my questions or help me with medication or deliver my insulin, et cetera? And then emergency go bag. Yes, we hear that we need to prepare an emergency bag, but what does that mean? What does that contain? If I am without power for 2-3 days plus, then how do I know what is adequate? So really having more detailed information. And one of the persons that we spoke to, he said, he prefers to stay at home. He knows that he is encouraged to go to a shelter when there's a hurricane or a storm, but he's comfortable in his environment. It's an environment that he knows, and if he has any issues, he doesn't know what he can expect to find in a shelter. So there was that uncertainty that really paralyzed people in terms of impending hazards. There were a number of recommendations that came from the experts we spoke to, and I won't go through all of them in the interest of time, but because the segment of older persons is so varied, it really focuses on creating and using media effectively. So yes, we might have emergency alerts that are broadcast at certain times, but how can we also have segments that might address things like shelters or healthcare in disaster situations, or how to store water properly, things that get to the crux of the questions that people have. How do we supplement the traditional media with other methods, word of mouth, social media, other forms of engaging older persons, such as the district emergency organizations? How do we bring them all together as part of the conversation? And then, as I mentioned before, really clear and actionable messages. So not just the type of event, but the things that they can do to address whatever might occur as a result of the event. The other thing that came out of the research was just the perceived levels of hurricane preparedness. So there are those that feel prepared, meaning, their house is secured, they have a safe room in the middle of the house somewhere that they can go if the windows are shaking too much with high winds. They have some hurricane supplies on hand, they know where to find the list of shelters, and they're usually informed and engaged with the news. But then there are those that feel somewhat prepared. They don't have transportation, so if something happens, they're not sure that family can come out to actually be able to help them in the midst of a hurricane or a storm. They need to purchase more hurricane supplies, so they know that a storm is coming. They may have gone and bought Eclipse biscuits, corned beef, but that might not last for 2-3 days plus. So they're not as prepared as they think they should be. There's no home insurance because of financial constraints. Things are tough. And again, they don't want to move out of their homes because they don't know what's going to happen if they move. And then there are those that are barely prepared. No home insurance, don't know where shelters are. The structure of their homes needs work. They don't have emergency contacts, never considered an emergency bag. But one thing that came out was that even for those that felt prepared in the conversations that we were having, when you started to delve a little bit deeper, you realize that there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. So some people might not have enough insulin for a number of days. They might be about to run out, and they're just things that have not been thought through. If we were in a situation like some of our Caribbean neighbors were, where we're without power or without water for multiple days. And once again, the experts that we spoke to, and this information is for the disaster agencies and the media, public education, efforts like this that help to raise awareness, that help to address some of the issues that people might be facing, more detailed messaging, as it's come out from media agencies and the disaster agencies, and really trying to share the information that's available to people through organizations like the National Assistance Board, Home Help, etc. And one thing, because some of the people that we spoke to were also institutional caregivers, and there were some interesting findings that came out of those conversations as well. One of them owns or is president of a senior citizens village, but the president was sharing that in a storm or hurricane, their staff actually leaves the complex because they have their own families that they need to care for. So even though there are a number of senior citizens on the complex, they're left. Of course, they try to prepare them as much as possible, but if something were to happen during that storm period, there's nobody at the complex that can really help. And so they were asking for financial resources, yes, to be able to do things like put signage or posters or cameras so they can better monitor the facility when someone isn't there, but also they cited the need to collaborate more with some of the emergency organizations so that they're aware that, this particular senior citizens village is unmanned during an emergency situation, and it can be at the top of their list if needed to visit in the case of a storm or hurricane. So those were just some of the key findings that came out of the research. We've shared it with the Department of Emergency Management, the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. And I would just like to thank you for the support in carrying out the research as well. But the purpose of it is really to kind of shine a light on what older persons are experiencing, not just one group, but various aspects and elements within the older population, and see how we can work together with media as well as disaster organizations and your NGOs and civil society organizations to create a structure that better supports you and your family in times of disasters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cox, for presenting those findings. We will now move into the panel discussion segment of this morning's proceedings. So I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists, some of whom are still in the audience, to come forward. Station Officer of the Barbados Fire Service, Mr. Roger Bourne. Acting Director of the National Assistance Board, Ms. Colleen Walcott. President of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, Ms. Marilyn Rice-Bowen. Program Officer, Department of Emergency Management, Mr. Simon Aline, and Hospital Manager of the Geriatric Hospital, Mrs. Heather Payne Drakes. Our moderator for this session will be Mr. Stetson Babb, Director of News and Current Affairs at Starcom Network. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
I'll go again. Good morning, fellow seniors. Good morning. Because you know we old but not cool. Right. My name is Stetson Babb. I'm your moderator for today. Protocol being established, but of course want to recognize the Honorable Minister who gave an outstanding speech. Quite interesting. Thank you. Our panel, Station Officer Roger Bourne, of the National Assistance Board, the Acting Director, Ms. Colleen Walcott. My good friend and neighbor, Marilyn Rice-Bowen, the president, the very distinguished president of the Barbados Association of Retired Persons. And that's actually genuine. She actually is my very good friend and my close neighbor. Mr. Simon Aline of the Department of Emergency Management, the program officer of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Hospital Manager, Mrs. Heather Payne Drakes. Now, you know, a person who is close to me who lectures a bit always tells me you can have a great answer to the wrong question. So before addressing any issue, I'd like to first define what's that issue? Disaster. First of all, what is disaster? Well, obviously in the traditional context, we in this region think of storms, of course hurricanes, that's a severe storm, flood, and we might even consider the more statistically remote but still quite plausible prospect of a major earthquake. But that is a rather limited perception of the possibilities and threats. Indeed, a disaster can be any sudden event, or you might say catastrophe, that causes great damage and or loss of life. Example, a COVID-19 pandemic. Who would have thought that a flu-like disease could shut down this country for 2 years? Who could have imagined that? And none of us is invincible. I remember I went to, I won't prolong this too much, but I went to work every day during the COVID-19 pandemic. Never got COVID. Went to all the briefings, it was up and down. As when they thought the pandemic was over, I left them in New York and got COVID, and got it twice. Never got it. Anyhow, but I digress. So, yes, a disaster is a serious disruption of society at any scale due to hazardous events. But there is then the cause, the disaster, and then there's effect, which is the critical part. How are we, especially we seniors, how are we affected? How are we impacted? Where the impact is felt, the cause, where the impact is felt, disruption of normal life of society, socially and economically. And of course, seniors may have a number of vulnerabilities, mobility, again there too, lack of connectivity, limited financial means, health vulnerabilities that put them more at risk. So, in fact, as the DEM director correctly pointed out, seniors are disproportionately more impacted at times of disaster. So how do we then mitigate? That is, reduce those impacts, minimize those vulnerabilities. Which brings us to the theme here. How do we then protect seniors in times of disaster? So good morning to the panel. I'll ask first of you to each articulate, and I got some questions as well. And by the way, we'll have the panel have their discussion and contributions, but we want to hear from you, the audience as well. So I'll ask each of you, maybe we can start with Station Officer Roger Bourne, each of you to describe how you see, what is your major concern in relation to protecting seniors at times of disaster? Mr. Bourne?
Let me respond from the point of house fires. Recognize that vulnerable group, elderly, and there's no way of protecting a fire within their homes. When we visit these homes during the course of our fire prevention program, we recognize that having the early warning device, a simple smoke alarm, it might cost $30 to us, and we say it is nothing to us. But to a pensioner, $30 seems like a lot. The fire service have embarked on many programs, work with private sector, and work with the National Assistance Board, work with even the DEOs in some organizations to install smoke alarms within these homes. But then a year later, you go back, the battery is dead. Smoke alarms are in place, but they're not working. So we have to develop programs of battery replacements for these donations that we do. So it is not just simple things that we come into contact with, but when we have these, one of the major things that we bugbears is that there's no early warning devices. So a person may be sleeping in their bedroom, the fire starts in the kitchen, and the only time they know there's a fire when the smoke gets to the bedroom. And generally at that point, it is too late. So if we have early warning devices, we can reduce the death, injuries that are caused mainly in house fires.
Thank you. Ms. Walcott, National Assistance Board, what's your greatest concern?
I will answer while you start the mic out. So one of our major concerns at the National Assistance Board is that we are not reaching the most vulnerable persons prior to a disaster. So we deliver services in the community, and yes, a lot of our beneficiaries, we know of their circumstances, we know of their needs. But it's amazing the number of referrals or the persons that we then become aware of who are most vulnerable. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, where were these people all the time? Where are these people living? Why it is that communities are not referring these persons? Why it is that we are not aware that we're not delivering services to these persons? And that is our major concern. If we're going to give services to the most vulnerable, we cannot wait until a disaster to give them the service. We have to know of these persons before.
Indeed, your major concern is ensuring you identify the most vulnerable so that they can be helped before and in fact during all phases of a disaster. Marilyn Rice-Bowen of BARP, your concern.
Thank you, Stetson. We are concerned, like Colleen, about the lack of preparation, because we all feel that it cannot happen to us, and our structures are strong enough, and we still hold very close to the notion that God is a agent, so that it will pass, even if they say it will pass at the last moment. But some of the questions and what makes persons very hesitant to leave their homes is that they want to know if they can take their pets. What do I do with my pets? Now, there are some people who say, pets, malady, cat or the dog die. But what do I do with my pet? And they also want to know if the family will be notified of where they're going. So everything goes back to early preparation, because if there is a plan in place, then the family members will know that in the event of a disaster, Mary Smith will go to Vauxhall. They must know, and they must know ahead of time. And what I want to also place here, we'll go deeper into it. They all also want to know if I leave my home, and my home then is damaged or destroyed, where do I go? Do I stay in the shelter? And they're also concerned about the fact that not everybody is mobile. So if you're referring me to a center and I'm wheelchair bound, does that shelter have bathrooms that can accommodate the persons who are wheelchair bound? And if the persons who are bedridden, what happens to those persons as well? So there are quite a few plans, and I want to deposit this and come back out, and we'll get there. We'll go deeper later. And I want to ask, I'll place it here, deposit it here, but is there a national evacuation plan in place for senior citizens' homes? And if it is, was the allocation based on headcount, or is it based on mobility? And I'll stop right here.
Mr. Allen of DEM, we heard about the special vulnerabilities of seniors at times of disaster, but also their reluctance to leave the property to maybe seek shelter, etc. So therefore, at times of disaster, what measures are in place to accommodate seniors during emergencies and disasters?
All right, thank you so much, Stetson. I want to say that the Department of Emergency Management operates under the CDM policy, which is Comprehensive Disaster Management. And it goes beyond just looking at disaster management as the responsibility of the Department of Emergency Management. But as you can see by the other agencies represented here, our aim is to coordinate the National Emergency Management System to ensure that our seniors are accommodated during times of crisis. But a number of questions arose. I heard the question from Marilyn as it relates to senior citizens' homes. Now, one of the things that all senior citizens' homes have to get is the approval of the Barbados Fire Service. That is one of the things that they have to do. But on top of that, they are supposed to create plans that are, of course, shared with us at DEM so that we can go through them and assist them. And then, of course, have planned or predetermined evacuation routes and assembly points for seniors who are in senior citizens' homes. This same thing would happen after the construction of the new geriatric hospital as well. All of these institutions are supposed to have plans that treat to the evacuation as well as the assembly points identified for persons who may be in these facilities. For us with DEM, one of our concerns would be at the community level, because we know that once the seniors are able to get to the hurricane shelter, that is when we have the support from the other organizations to assist them directly after the impact of the hurricane or an earthquake. Because when they come to the shelters, we get all of their information, and then we're able to allocate the necessary social services that they would need to assist them. Whether it's the National Assistance Board, whether it's the Welfare Department, whether it's in the ministry, within the Ministry of People Empowerment. So for us, our greatest concern are those seniors who may be neglected in communities. And that's why we've had the DEOs out there getting information to help with our vulnerable persons list. So we need to identify those persons in the various communities who live alone, who may not have mobility and may not have access to get to a shelter. So for us, we need to have those names so that we can identify those persons so that they can get that intervention, whether it is in terms of evacuation, being taken to a private facility or a public facility, and also to ensure that, God forbid, in the case of persons passing away, we have an accurate record of those persons.
You know, one of the points Mrs. Rice-Bowen mentioned was what she perceived as a lack of preparedness, which comes from complacency. True. I use the term God is a Bajan, but we should remind everyone that everyone in the Caribbean uses that same term. God is a Trinidadian, God is a Grenadian, who's God from Union Island. Just bear that in mind. People in Grenada and St. Vincent and Union Island also have God. Mrs. Payne-Drakes, your portfolio, what are some of the main concerns for health professionals?
So our main concerns, naturally, the continued health care of all persons, especially the elderly, because of our vulnerabilities. So we are concerned about things like continued access to medication. Is this person able to administer the medication, or is there support network for the person? Is the person frail? Is the person at risk for falls? These are all things that are critical at all times, but especially during a disaster. Continued access to clean water. This can impact the health of an elderly person, of all persons, but especially elderly persons. Maintaining good nutrition, having access to clean food, reducing exposure to physical harm, preventing falls again, especially in the elderly, this could be detrimental, reducing stress. So generally maintaining their health, ensuring that they can continue to have their medication administered, persons who may have dementia, having a support network or having persons around who can ensure that their health is supported during disasters.
I think this might be a good time to open the floor to some questions. So you can do so by a show of hands. Is there a microphone in the audience that someone can use? Questions from the floor? And while we wait for, I'm sure, all the many questions that we'll have from the audience, let's go back to Station Officer Bourne. What are some of the other measures that you would want and you would advise seniors to put in place to protect themselves before, during, and of course, to recover after a disaster?
I want that the you call them? The elderly? The senior persons within their community. Create a grab bag with your important stuff in it, a grab bag with your medication in it, a grab bag with your important documents, so that when something happens, you just grab that bag and go. Now, sometimes situations happen where, like, we had the hurricane which popped up on us seriously, and lots of people got caught behind the 8 ball, as they say. Now, you need to have a safe place in your home. Generally, in most homes, you would find that maybe it's a wood house or wooden wall house, and the bathroom and the kitchen are the wall structures. So the bathroom has the smallest window, and it generally be the most safest place in your home in event that you get caught and you can't get out and something seriously happen. Now, we want you to, identify these things. Also, identify evacuation plan. Every person must have evacuation plan for their home. If I go home and I see my house missing, I know for sure my family is to the east, over by my friend, and I know the number. So once I look around, I just pick up the phone. How's my wife and son? And they should be okay because we have evacuation plan for our homes. Everyone needs to have evacuation plan. Put it in place, practice it. Don't wait until it happens and then deal with it. But also, we talked about vulnerability and vulnerable persons. The Barbados Fire Service, myself, Bridgetown Station, working with Miss Graves and her DEOs from St. Michael Southeast, they have walked through their area and looked at the vulnerable persons, identify them, so that when a hurricane is pending, they know, well, look, we need to go and work with these particular individuals, move them out from their home, get them into shelters as early as possible because they are immobile. Some may be ably assisted, but still not have the speed to move quickly. But I'm pleased to know that I was happy this morning when Minister Humphrey talked about the geospatial mapping. And that map, in my opinion, is a beautiful base map that we can put various layers on top of it. So if the DEOs, all the DEOs in this country actively work to find those vulnerable groups, that database will be able to be published where DEM has access to it, the DEOs has access to it, the fire service have access to it. Every critical person that needs access to it has access to that map, where we can now have those persons identified, have the map updated regularly, so we can better know exactly where these persons are, how to get them from where they are and take them to where they're going. So that map is critical because you can put so many other layers on top of that map that be able to help the citizens of Barbados and also help the agencies to better mitigate the problem as they arise.
Interesting point. The need to have a map, or rather plan that maps out the locations of the vulnerable, so better facilitate response during and after disaster. So the question is, and I want to put this question to the National Assistance Board, to Ms. Walker there.
I have a question down there as well.
We'll take a question in a minute. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah.
But first, before we hold it, what measures are in place then, based on that point, to reach the elderly pre, during, and post-disaster?
For the National Assistance Board, what we do, we service over 1,300 beneficiaries in one program and over 900 in the other. And what we have in-house for our beneficiaries is what we call our internal vulnerable persons list. And every beneficiary is on that list. Within that list then is then the priorities, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. So that list is a comprehensive list. It's a very, very fluid list because sometimes circumstances can change very, very fast. That list then feeds into the ministry's vulnerable persons list, the master list, comprehensive national list, so that they then can do the actual mapping. But we can only map with information and correct information. Yes, we can reach our beneficiaries, but there's so many more persons out there who do not benefit from social services. or the National Assistance Board services or the Welfare Department services, that we will still need information from you. So at one point, we would have put out a public service asking for persons, older persons, to respond, just to give us some information so that we can populate that list. The response was very, very, very minimal. But again, we have to relook at to see how did we communicate it based on now the information coming out of the BBC Media Action Study. How did we communicate it and when did we communicate it? But we need to have information. And just remember, we always said, as we said before, we're not going to lump, there are persons, older persons who are quite capable and independent and have the social support and have the social systems that they can manage. Fine, that is excellent, because the first thing that we do, once we have that information, we start to make that call. One of the first things we're going to ask, is there any family member that you can stay with who would look out for you? So you will see many older persons living alone. But the first thing that we do, and in a disaster, is not that we want to accommodate. We cannot accommodate everyone. We cannot put everyone in shelters. We just do not have the resources to evacuate everyone, but everyone does not need to be evacuated as well. So once we have the information, we can see where the gaps are, what resources are needed, and who are the ones that most need the service.
Thank you.
Before you take the question, I just want to deposit a task for everybody to do when you get home this evening. Take pictures of the interior and exterior of your home. Go room by room and take photos, because if something happens, you will not remember what the house looked like before, and if you need to place a claim, you will be in a better position to say, well, this is how it looked, it was in a good state of repair, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So when you get home tonight, before you get on the phone and sharing the information about what you learned today, go room by room and take pictures of that home and save those photos, because if something happens, it puts you in a better position when you have to address your claims.
I suspect what triggered Mrs. Rice-Bowen's, or may have Rice-Bowen's mind in relation to that, maybe some of the stark images we saw from Hurricane Beryl, and what we are now seeing from Helene in North America. And I want to get back to that after we take some more questions from the floor. Some questions from the floor, because oftentimes we talk about wow factor and aha moments. And I'm curious to hear from the panel, what about the experiences and events of Beryl in particular and Helene struck you and said, aha, wow, and in terms of our own experience here, how we should prepare, how we should respond. So I'll get to that in a minute. Audience?
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for the valuable information that has been shared. But one area that has not been heard is for those people who are on dialysis. What would be the evacuation plan for those people? Because we know people on dialysis, usually it's 3 times a week, and, so the question would be, what would be the evacuation plan for people on dialysis if necessary? Thank you.
Right. Sorry, if I could answer that, I would believe that patients would have to be instructed by their doctor. That's the person that should be able to give you the correct direction on what to do, especially if you go to a private facility or you go to the QBH to access the dialysis treatment. You would have to speak to your doctor. That person would have to speak to the doctor so that they will understand what would be the follow-up procedures.
Mrs. Payne-Driggs of the Ministry of Health, would you want to deal with that as well, from a medical perspective?
Well, as was alluded to, if you have medical conditions that require critical interventions, for your survival, you need to have a chat with your medical provider and find out what steps you should take in the event of a disaster. Remember, in a disaster, everybody's impacted. So although you may have an appointment 3 days a week at a facility, that facility may not be standing. So you have to develop a plan in conjunction with your healthcare provider that would help you to continue to live as best as possible until you can get that medical attention. But you have to keep in contact with your healthcare providers, with your nurses. And as was alluded to this morning, this is a community-wide approach as well. Because if systems break down, if services break down, you need to have a family member, a neighbor, a friend, a member of your church, a member of a community group who can assist you. So it's really a community-wide approach, because we don't know the extent of any disaster. We don't know what the outcome would be, but it's to have that support and that assistance at all times.
Question?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My concern is that I was going to the doctor for a while. As a matter of fact, I was having pains right time I was a child. All over my body. Couldn't run, falling down all the time. And as I get older, these pains continue. And I went to Dr. Shepherd, who sent me to get a CAT scan. And that CAT scan sent me to Dr. Flowers. I went to Dr. Flowers, and Dr. Flowers said she took blood for 5 bottles, and she sent it off for, to realize what is the problem. But when the results came back, she said, there's nothing wrong with me. So I keep going to different doctors, and they're telling me, but you look like you have rheumatoid arthritis.
This sounds though, and I'm really deeply concerned about your particular medical predicament, but I'm wondering maybe we could take that info, take your name and contact info, and I'm sure we have panelists here, including Mrs. Marilyn Rice-Bowen, who will be quite keen to look into that.
I wasn't going to stay long. I was going to wrap up now.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question is, now that Dr. Flowers is not at the hospital, there's no, I don't know what it's called her. She deals with rheumatoid arthritis and different things. But I don't have a doctor now to attend because I can't pay.
Indeed.
You understand?
Right.
So I need to know what to do.
Indeed. Right. So can we make sure we take your name and number and pass it on? And Mrs. Marilyn Rice-Bowen and others here will follow up, because it's a very important issue you raise in terms of your health predicament, and we want to ensure you get the best help and support for that.
Yeah, what I will do, we have a working relationship. BARP, we work with everybody. And we have a working relationship with the Hope Foundation. So if you give me your information, I'll pass it on to the Hope Foundation, and then somebody from there will definitely call you. All right? So we can work together on that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I have 2 questions. Sure. The first one really was something that this lady just brought to my. She was saying that at the
just raise the mic a bit, please. Thanks.
At the hurricane shelters, if they have any doctors or medical personnel at the hurricane shelters, that would be the first question.
At hurricane shelters, we have first aiders. We have trained first aiders at the emergency shelters, as we call them.
Okay. And then my second question is, if I came in contact with someone who was elderly, just very simply, and I think, is it the National Assistance Board that I would go to get their name on the list? That's it? That would be the first step for post-hurricane, for after hurricane, if in the event that they needed help after hurricane, who would they go to? Who should they just go to first? Which organization? Because there are lots of organizations.
Not only for post-hurricane,
Yes.
but it's best that we have that information before.
Yes. So but after a hurricane, they would
Yes.
go to the National Assistance Board. Is that where?
No, so you give us, I will take the information, I can take the information from you as soon as we are finished here. I can have a further discussion with you as to the process.
Okay. Fair enough. Thanks.
This lady in front here, right here, in the front row.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This question is for Simon. How often do your DE or officers go out in the community?
Right. So DEO officers usually at least monthly. They have monthly meetings, and then they also plan activities around the monthly meetings that they have. So every DEO that's functioning in the constituencies, they will have meetings either at a school or a church or whatever. But they're supposed to do community walkthroughs. The community walkthroughs are important because they not only identify hazards, but they're also able to identify those vulnerable persons in the community.
The reason why I ask is I've been living in Green Hill now for 18 years. It's a long time.
Green Hill?
Yes. I have not seen one of your officers yet.
Okay, that's St. Michael North DEO. That's in St. Michael North.
Yes.
Right. They are going through some restructuring now.
Okay.
So once that restructuring is over, you can be guaranteed that our DEOs will be on the ground, DEO members. And I would also extend an invitation to you, ma'am, because the DEOs, of course, they come from within the community. If you believe that you can be of any assistance, voluntary, by joining a district emergency organization, please allow Tonia to take your name and number so that we can get back to you when the DEO is restarted.
I don't mind helping, but my 2 feet now are not very good. So I don't do a lot of walking. I walk with the aid of a cane now. I have osteoarthritis.
Okay.
So that sort of slows me up a bit, right? But before all of these different things happen, do your people go out, and give information or things like that?
Yes, they do. Like I said before, the DEOs do a lot of work. It may not, you may not see them, but they're out there in the communities gathering information and also announcing their meetings and doing community work. I know that for St. Michael North, they're in a transitionary period, but the other DEOs, like up to last night, I was on a Zoom call with the Christchurch West DEO. So there are a number of DEOs that are active and that would offer assistance and gather information before the impact of any event.
Okay, I'm retired from work now. So tell them make a walkthrough and let me know who they are.
Which gap are you in?
I'm in 2nd Avenue, Green Hill. My name is Caroline.
Caroline, sweet Caroline?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Caroline. 2nd Avenue, Green Hill. Okay.
Caroline, let me see if I can. What do you think it would be useful as well, in addition to the direct face-to-face interactions with the DEO and their constituents, that perhaps some of that, more of that information could be shared across the various forms of media? So they also heard? Indeed. But I want to say every question is important. So those who have questions, and some may be, health information is quite sensitive information. So you may want to let's make a note of that and deal with that after so that we can get the appropriate assistance from the appropriate people for you, so that we can focus primarily on the questions on disaster and disaster preparedness and how you can be better helped during those periods.
Seniors.
Anybody else? That gentleman in the, or lady rather, I'm sorry.
In the pink.
Senior, just remember I'm senior, so my eyesight is not that well.
My only concern has been with the communication. We are communication information now. When bad weather comes, we have no phone. We used to have a landline before, but now there's no communication. That's my concern.
Right. So that's why it's very important. And I think that if we are realistic, when these major events happen, whether it's a major tropical storm or a hurricane or earthquake, it is expected that utilities will be disrupted. I am quite sure that when we had the ash fall, some of you were without electricity or even water for a couple of days just because of the ash fall. So similarly, in the passage of a hurricane or any major impact from a hazard, you will suffer from a loss of connectivity. That is why not only is it applicable for hurricane season, having a transistor radio tuned into your favorite Starcom station, you will be able to get the information. We have an authority when it comes to information. When you hear this voice on the radio, you know that Mr. Bob is going to give you updated information about what's happening. So although you may not be able to call out, information will come to you. And that is why it's important that you have your radios with the batteries.
Lady, you want to do it?
Hello, excuse me. My concern was calling persons.
Right. So this is during a hurricane or after the impact of...
During or before or after. We don't have that anymore.
Only the cell phones. That's what I mean. Only cell phones.
We all, us older persons don't have that, but once upon a time we had a phone line that we could call people or persons could call and check on us. This last time with Beryl, no one could call, you know, if there was something bad, no one could call me or I could call them.
Because the phone line, you were saying that the phone line went down or you don't have a phone?
There's no phone line afterwards unless you pay for it.
Just a minute. I think, just a minute. She's asked an important question to do with, which is actually one of the key identified vulnerabilities of the elderly during, before, and after, in fact, during and after a disaster, which is the whole question of limited communication and a sense of isolation and loneliness that's bred as a result of that. That's actually identified as a key vulnerability. So she's speaking to the extent to how the new technology, as useful and as advanced as it is in some way, in other ways it has its limitations. Mrs. Rice-Bowen?
Yes, thank you, Stetson. I want to shed some light on it for you, and I'm speaking as a senior. The landline days are done, and they're not returning. So what we do as seniors, we make sure that we have our cell phones charged. Would you let me finish?
Yeah, yes,
if
please.
you let me finish, then you might not have to be mumbling. You charge your cell phones. This is where we are living now. I mean, it's not going to change. We charge our cell phones. And ma'am, I didn't get your name, but what we tend to tell persons not to do. Wait till after the system passes and you call Mary. And when you call Mary, tell her that she can then call John. You have to operate like a chain. It will not be possible for you to take up your phone and call everybody to tell them that you're all right. You're going to shut down the network, all right? We all know that everybody will be concerned. And I'm saying this because as seniors now, we are forced to change our way of communicating. It's not something that is readily embraced, but what we need to do is to recognize that there is a challenge, and rather than, back away and say, oh Lord, it's a challenge, we have to face challenges head on. We are the resilient generation. So don't, I know because we all pay for landline and as electricity go off, flow gone. All right? But let us realize that we have to work with what we have.
Right.
And we are going to charge our cell phones. We are going to buy the little power banks, and let us use the power banks, but keep your calls to a minimum. And I'm certain the EM would support us on this. Keep the calls to a minimum. You know, your roof gone, or telling somebody water in the house, or, you know, just keep the calls to a minimum. And if you must make a call, if it's really, really important, you need to make a call, call the DEM, right? Call the DEM, and then everything will work out in the end. But let us try to change the way we operate. And it's going to be all right. It will be all right.
Yeah. That's a nice segue into the point.
Well said. Thank you.
I wanted to ask earlier, the fact is, you mentioned telecommunications. The fact is that systems in Barbados work very well, even at an international level. The fact is that even the most resilient system, depending on the severity of the impact of the incident, may not withstand it. The US, purportedly the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world, with you'd expect some of the best infrastructure. Today, there are at least 600 people listed as dead or missing as a result of Hurricane Helene. It is believed that many of those people may not be dead, hopefully they're not, but simply out of communication because the cell phone systems aren't working. They don't have a means of communicating. So if they can't locate you or you can't contact anyone. And that's the great United States. So that brings me to the question, though. We've had, more recently, we have Beryl. We've had Helene. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, what was your wow or aha moment? You said, oh, that's an important lesson. Whoa, if that happened here, what would we do? How can we prepare for that? My question to the panel, you can take it in, whoever wants to take it first.
Okay. Let the seniors lead the way. My wow was the storm surges, because very often you hear about storm surges, but the storm surges in Helene, because they were scheduled to be at least 20 feet. And when you saw the water coming into people's homes, I was saying, but why did these people evacuate? And I'm thinking that in the event of a system passing the island, it is better to go and come back to the home. If it's flooded or if it's severely damaged, you know, you would go deal with it. But it's always best to leave, because I remember what to me was real scary was when the officials, I don't know if it was the fire or the police, tell you, if you decide to stay, write your name and date of birth on your hand with permanent marker. That's what they were. If you decide you're staying, write your name and your date of birth with a permanent marker on your hand. That was a very strong message. So
Before you go in, Marilyn, you need to explain why they said that. Because they issued an evacuation order, especially for people in the Keys, who are very low-lying areas close to the beach, who are vulnerable to storm surge. They said, if you defy this evacuation order, you do not leave now, what you need to do is to write your name and address and contact number of next of kin on your arm or leg, so when the storm passes, we'll come and pick up your body.
Yeah.
Simple.
Because recovery.
Recovery. It won't be rescue.
It won't be rescue. It will be recovery.
To recover the body.
That's right. Well said.
And that's the advice. Could you imagine, Mr. Humphrey, or any politician in Barbados saying that to the public?
Wow.
Go ahead.
My aha moment from Barrow was, I got a few reports. We got a few reports from the hearing impaired saying that the information was, they didn't get the information. There was no one doing sign language on the television. There was no text messages coming out. And the radio's there, but what is the radio to the hearing impaired? So I'm just saying that's a vulnerable group that we've kind of missed. I was even having a discussion this morning with a a new company in the market, and just on my way here, just on the phone, and he was saying, when I look in America, there's these devices that go on your hand, a wristwatch, or the chain, and you can, is a alert button you press. And he said, well, Roger, how would that work in Barbados? I said, well, you got to come and sit down to the table. Let's figure out how best to introduce this new product into the country. Because when you, I don't know the cost, but he said, so when you install it into your home, and then the watch device or either the chain around your pendant, that you can just activate, and it would activate 911, and 911 would take it from there. So, it's a conversation that we would need to have, and only this morning it happened. So it's something that I think is really feasible for the seniors to have, so that if you're home and you slip and you fall, you can't move, press the button. Something goes wrong, you feel like you're coming down with a heart attack, press the button. So that's something that, piece of technology that we would have to look at. On top of that too, in terms of the hearing impaired, the Barbados Fire Service is embarking on social media. The reason why you're embarking on social media so that the vulnerable persons who, for sure the hearing impaired, will be now able to contact the Barbados Fire Service via social media. And for instance, we've last year had 2 fires reported via the hearing impaired. Well, came through me. They contacted me and did a video call, and then sent a pin to the location, and we were able to respond. So, those are the things that we're going to have to work with the DEOs, not necessarily us by ourselves, but work with the DEOs and work with BARP to make sure that these vulnerable groups know how to do these things, because everybody don't know how to do a pin. Everybody you just know hello, but how to do a video call, how to do a WhatsApp, how to do a social media call, how to do a Facebook call, how to do an Instagram call, so that the fire service is there waiting, and we just want to prepare these things. So we are moving into that zone as quickly as possible so that we can bridge that gap with that vulnerable group.
Fascinating, very interesting discussion. Let's commence our wrap-up session. I want to hear your overall thoughts now. And I'll start with Mrs. Heather Payne-Driggs of the Geriatric Hospital.
I think it's extremely important for you to gather information on your medical condition. Okay? Get a little notebook that you can put in something that is waterproof to keep on your person during any event. You can have your medical conditions, you can note your allergies, your medications, the dosages, your doctors, the persons who provide care to you. Because after the event is over and things get back to normal, you might not really remember that you are on such and such medication and you're taking it twice a day, and you may have a number of medical conditions that are being treated. So having that information at hand in a safe place and that can be retrieved and that you can show it to a doctor or a nurse whenever that opportunity comes is very important to maintain your health, and not only for us elderly persons, your children, your grandchildren, because in many instances you'll find in a home the elderly member is taking care of a younger person who has some debilitating condition. So it's not just providing for the elderly, it's provided for all persons in your home and in your community.
Mr. Bourne.
Just want each and every one to focus on their unique vulnerability. There are some who are immobile. There are some who are hearing impaired. There are some who are blind. The Barbados Fire Service have to take care of each and every one of those persons. So as you focus on your vulnerability and your disability, we want you to work with us to come up with a plan, best way that we can help you. But it said it takes a community to raise a child. As we get older, that same community has to take care of us as well.
That's right.
So our neighbors have to be our brother's keeper.
That's right.
Same way that the other day we had an incident and one person went missing. The next person we picked up the next day went knock on his house, didn't see him, and tried to track him down to recognize that he has passed. Wow. So we have to look out for our brothers and our sisters. The fire service can't do it all. The DEM can't do it all. BARP can't do it all. The QH can't do it all. But if we work together as a community, we can be really resilient.
Mr. Allen?
Right. I think that the message that we would want to convey to you on behalf of the Department of Emergency Management really is that we are all in this together. And that is why we had this event. We hosted this event because we want to remind seniors that you are not forgotten. You are still very valuable to our community. And it's important that we recognize that when we look at what the United Nations says about vulnerable groups, it includes women, children, and seniors. And for any of our programs or interventions to work, we need your support, but we also need to get out to you. I heard very clearly from Caroline that there needs to be a lot more DEO involvement. I also heard that we have to ensure that we have different ways of communicating to our seniors. And that is why we hold sessions like this, so that we can go back and impress on policymakers to ensure that we have the policies in place that all of you are not only protected, but that you can also continue life as normal after the passage of a hurricane or after the impact of a major event. I just want to say that we at DEM, we stand committed to ensuring that every person in Barbados understands not only their personal responsibility as it relates to preparedness, but also understand that at the national level, there are a lot of programs to assist and to, of course, help you after the impact of a major event.
Mrs. Colleen Walcott, NAB.
So our messaging and our communication very often tells persons what to do and tells seniors what to do and how to do it. I think we have to change the narrative in some cases. There will be older persons and groups of older persons who cannot do it. A lot of them are not here today, cannot be here today, are not hearing the messages, or either lack the resources to do it. So therefore, what has to be done, and what we have done already in a project with the DEOs, is to do with people. Go to people and take the information, and not only take the information, but take the resources. So prior to Beryl, what we would have done in one of the communities, we partnered with the DEOs, and we went into the communities. So we're telling persons about getting the right utensils. They may lack the resources. They're confined to bed. They don't know what to buy. So we got sponsorship. We purchased the utensils, and we take it to them. We're talking about radios and flashlights. Got the sponsorship. We purchased those things, and we take it to them, and we help them to get prepared. And we're really hoping that once we have the resources, that we can replicate that in other communities, so that we do with people rather than telling them what to do. Some of them will not get the message.
Mrs. Rice-Bowen, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Stetson. And as I wind up, I want to thank the DEM for, extending the offer to BARP so that we can assist with the preparation. And if nothing else, we recognize that there is an urgent need for early preparedness. There's, we just can't linger on it anymore. Part of our remit as BARP is so that our members can lead lives with independence and dignity. And we view BARP as a beacon for seniors, and you know the word seniors in this country. Mm-hmm. And we, therefore, will continue to plan with you and for you, because, as everybody say all the time, but we mean it for sure. We are all in this together. And we didn't get here for all these years. We didn't get here by chance. We are here, we have the experience, we have the knowledge, and as I keep saying all the time, we are as resilient can be. So we will continue to work with other agencies, and including the DEM, as we seek to prepare our seniors for any disaster. And I want to leave another tip with you. Just before the high winds come, change your voice message you have. You reach Marilyn, you reach Peter, whatever. Change your voicemail message before the system comes, if you're going to be evacuating. So I'm going by Ulrich. I would say if you reach Marilyn, I've gone to Ulrich's house, and his number is this, he's located such and such a place. And you leave it there. What happens is even if your phone goes down, whatever happens, your voicemail will always be played. Yes. So when somebody tries to get you, say, oh, that's where she gone. So that is what I want you to do. And you don't only use it for the disasters, but sometimes you get a flat tire and you realize your battery going low. Say, listen, I got a flat, I just called the 24-hour people, and I hear between the Queen's Park Steel Shed and the Baptist Church is 11 o'clock, right, 11 p.m. Right now I'm safe. I don't know how much longer I will be safe. Cut out, leave the phone off. So when anybody calling you, they will find out where you are. So we got to find our ways of staying in how we communicate with each other to get the message out. Yes. And trust me, you will always be safe. And as I close, I want you to make the rest of your life the best of your life.
Some important takeaways here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow seniors. Well, if God, well, he may very well be a Bayesian, who knows? But he certainly has been very good to us. But having said that, he's also a Grenadian and a Vincentian, and he spent some time in Union Island and in the Carolinas and in Florida. And they've all learned that things happen. What the old people like I say, Marilyn, when pass you ain't catch you? When catch you ain't pass you. There you go. So the key lesson is don't take it for granted. Don't become too complacent. Be prepared. We are all very vital, important members of this Barbadian community, and we want to save each and every one of our lives. The other point for Officer Bourne made was then how do we prepare and protect ourselves? We noted that there are various types of disaster. You mentioned the possibility of a fire. They need to have fire alarms, for instance, that give prior notice of, right? That we look out for each other, be our brother's keeper. There is also there's an issue of ensuring that we identify the vulnerable in communities and know where those people are. And therefore, you yourself can play your part in ensuring that your information is available to the relevant agency. They know who you are. You who are most vulnerable, they know who you are and where you are, so they can assist you when possible. But be prepared. I want to thank our panel. Station Officer Roger Bourne of the extremely hard-working Barbados Fire Service. Sir, and all your colleagues, we thank you for your service there every day.
Thank you, sir.
The Acting Director of the National Assistance Board, Mrs. Colleen Walcott. And again, for those who, let me give an example. There are people, many Bajans who emigrated to the US years ago. There are many who are now looking to come back home. Because this is the greatest country in the world, trust me on that. And we have perhaps some of the best and widest range of social services anywhere in the world. So we thank the NAB and all the other social service agencies for that. Mr. Simon Allen, on behalf of the representative of the Department of Emergency Management, DEM, of course, the Director, Ms. Kerri Hinds, your men and your women service all year round. And I've spent many nights at the DEM headquarters, so I know how hard you folks work.
That's right.
Right. Ministry of Health and Wellness, Hospital Director, Geriatric Hospital, Mrs. Heather Payne-Drakes.
Yes.
And, our medical services get their fair share of scrutiny, but we also know we have an exceptional health service, warts and all. I mean, it has its flaws, but we have an exceptional health service and health professionals. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm a good friend and neighbor, champion of the cause of us seniors. Madam President, good friend and neighbor, Marilyn Rice-Bowen. And of course, our honorable distinguished minister, hard-working Minister Kirk, Humphrey. The man, I listen to you on the House, extremely passionate on these issues. I only wish I was half as good-looking and half as bright and half as articulate. Imagine what I could do with that. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming and being here. And I certainly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My mother said when she came out and she looked in that direction, I didn't see a house standing. And she said, she told God, I would never like to live to see another hurricane. And I took what she said as gospel. I said, well, if my mother experienced it then and she said she didn't want to see another hurricane, I can't see it. I know if I want to see one.
When I hear of an impending storm or hurricane, I don't take it for granted. And people in my age group don't take it for granted. But I believe that attitude that we would see before, where people say, well, okay, they keep telling us this is going to happen, we catch a lot of water, and you don't have to use it, buy up all sorts of things. I think that more and more Barbadians are becoming dead serious about responding to the bulletins and the advisories when they're put up by government.
You can have a large segment of the elderly, which I've found in my research, having preferences to traditional media. For example, radio is number one when it comes to the elderly as a preference for information on natural disasters, followed by television and newspapers.
I have the CapCap app, and I listen to Weather Guy on YouTube, the Weatherman channel.
Plus, we also use the radio as well, another source of information, since it tends to be a lot more dependable than, you get some social media stuff, but we tend to more go for the reliable information than social media, which may float around, which may be somewhat accurate, but not quite.
Last event that we had, we get it on radio, like that night or early in the morning, or at devotion. If we didn't pick up anything, them straight away explain everything to us.
In the event of warning of some type of natural disaster, the steps are that elderly should be going to their guarantors once they are available. As we are aware, there are some elderly persons who do not have another place where they can go. So what we do in that case is we can facilitate transportation in order for them to go over to the shelter.
The elderly, like most at-risk groups, are particularly vulnerable to natural disasters. Elderly people largely have mobility-related issues, so that puts you at a disproportionate risk of being injured during the course of a natural disaster. I've also found that the elderly, because of certain chronic health conditions, we have a large proportion of elderly individuals who have chronic health conditions, which obviously make them at risk of losing access to vital medication during the course of a natural disaster.
we know that the center of itself, and I will speak specifically to the center as it pertains to the elderly persons, that the center of itself is a compound that has only elderly persons. However, we do not have contact currently with the DDM in order for them to come out and do checks with this center, as they are a more vulnerable part of society.
In a case like maybe the elderly, the visually impaired, etc., who may be unable to read print, that could be an additional challenge. But we can't sit down and use that as a crutch. We really have to do our best and as much as we can within our powers to ensure that we are part and parcel of the process. We too have to make ourselves available and access whatever method or means of communication that is available to us to keep in touch with what's happening.